Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Onica Makwakwa. I am the Executive Director at the Global Digital Inclusion Partnership. I thank each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon for this conversation on connected resilience, a report we published earlier this year looking at gendered experiences of meaningful connectivity through a global pandemic. I will be joined in this conversation by my colleagues, two of whom led the research at GDIP, as well as our colleagues who led the research in the different countries that we will be featuring through the case studies. I hope you've had a chance to look through the report, but if not, we will make sure to include the link in the chat so you may download the full report and are able to go through it. As we will go ahead and get started, and we will introduce each speaker as they come on for their segment. In the meantime, please be ready to ask any questions towards the end, as well as share any stories and experiences that are relevant to this discussion with us. So you're not limited to just questions. We are also welcoming you to share stories and experiences and observations that you've made. You can also use the chat for some of that. If I could have the next slide, please. The past few years have become quite clear that being just simply connected to the internet is not enough. We need to go beyond basic connectivity to ensure that everyone is meaningfully connected in order for them to be able to do the kinds of things that we are expected to do as a way of supplementing our lives, but also in transforming the lives of people who are likely to be left behind. However, far too many women continue to be in impoverished or rural or disadvantaged positions, and therefore account for too many of the unconnected or underconnected who are continuously left behind as society's fast track on digitization. Next slide, please. We will delve into these experiences, including looking at women's experiences in different places, such as India, which we covered in our last workshop. So if you have a chance to take a look at that, I will encourage you to do so. However, if you download our full report, you will realize that there's several case studies from Asia as well as the Africa case studies that really show and just really give us the detail of all the trouble that women go through in order for them to stay connected and be able to do the things that we assume very simply in order for them to participate in our digitized societies. Next slide, please. You will each agree with me that the internet and data supports this, that internet use has exponentially grown in terms of people using the internet. But as much as the COVID-19 pandemic was a challenge, it also served to spur the uptake of digital connection and digital use for many people. However, even with that increase, one of the things that has come out quite glaringly is the divide amongst the connected, that, you know, a basic connection is no longer good enough. If you take the pandemic as a good example, we were expected to work from home, children were expected to go to school from home, and many of our lives basically moved to online. However, with the kind of basic connection that most people had, it meant that they could not continuously be able to engage and access healthcare information that was critical to them staying safe, alive, and having current information. But as well as we've all seen the reports of how many children had to stay home without learning because of not being able to be adequately connected. There is a huge difference between a basic connection and being meaningfully connected. And when we talk about meaningful connection, I really invite you to visit our website, gdip.org, to really delve into some of the work we've done around defining meaningful connectivity, At the moment, internet affordability is defined as spending 1 gig of data for no more than 2% of average monthly income. And I think most of you will attest to me that if all of us had our videos on for this conversation and we only had 1 gig of data for the entire month, this would probably be the only conversation we can have online in that month. Therefore, even that international standard is fairly inadequate for the kinds of expectations and the promise that being connected has for helping to transform lives. So we need society that is meaningfully connected with an adequate speed of minimum 4 gigs, having access to a smart device such as like a smartphone, and being able to have access to data on a daily basis, either from school, work, or their home, which means that and also being able to have unlimited access to data as opposed to just 1 gig for a whole entire month. As well as things like then having the skills to be able to engage in a way that is meaningful online. So please, I'm going to welcome Nyambura Ndung'u, who is our Senior Research Manager at GDIP, to take us through this report and how the research was done, so that we can really, hopefully at the end of this, I'm hoping that each of us really understand what's at stake and are willing to make personal commitment and institutional commitments to continuing to learn and uncover and accept perhaps that it is unacceptable that women have to go through so much in order for them to do what just comes quite easily for many others in society. Take it on, Nyambura.
Thank you, Onica. Thanks, Onica. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you, and many thanks for connecting to this webinar. So just to continue from where Onica has left, is that this study, we highlight some of the findings of the report, and we encourage all of you to go deeper into the report and see what we found out. But basically, persistent digital divide in relation to economic impact, which we found there is a direct correlation between that. The more we exclude women, the more we exclude people from the rural areas, the more we exclude people based on their socio-economic status, then we are likely to keep on having an economic impact. Then we also highlighted systemic barriers to digital inclusions, which again, we will be going into details. We also highlight disparities in internet access based on gender, education, geography, and the like. And we highlight also the importance of meaningful connectivity. Onica has already indicated what we mean by meaningful connectivity, but we'll be going deeper into that. And finally, we provide strategies for enhancing digital inclusion that is not just from the African perspective, but we took examples globally. Can you go to the next slide? So what research methodologies did we employ for this? To begin with, we focused on women. We wanted to ensure that we are getting as many women as possible, but then also from all areas, socioeconomic, education, geography. So we interviewed 1,000 women from each of the countries, that is India, that is Bangladesh, Cambodia, Ghana, Mozambique, South Africa, and Uganda. And for these women, we ensured that 10% of those we interviewed did not use the internet. Because again, what we were saying, we don't just want to interview those people who are using the internet. We also want to find out, why are people not using the internet? Why are they not connected? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities they are missing? So basically, that's why we had that methodology. We also did focus group discussions in India, Mozambique, Nigeria, and Philippines. And we are glad that we have Fei from Mozambique and Tope from Nigeria. We'll be going deeper into this. We also did focus group discussions with policymakers. And with this, we targeted ministry officials, we targeted people working with the regulators. We also targeted people working with regional economic communities like the NEPAD, and who were able to get some of the challenges or opportunities they see when they're implementing or they're coming up with the policies with regard to the digital inclusion or the digital space at large. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what are the key highlights? that persistent digital divide and economic impact, that in the last 10 years, we have already lost USD 1 trillion billion. And if we do nothing about the situations, if we are not changing in terms of our strategies, in terms of our policies, in the next 5 years, then we are going to lose another 500 billion. So basically, it's a call for all of us to see what we can do. Is it from the implementation point of view? Is it from the policy point of view? Is it from the user point of view? Because again, in this digital space, everybody has a role to play. And it doesn't matter how small it is cumulatively the roles we play, and we are able to have this and to ensure that women are included in this digital honor. Please, let's go to the next slide. So what is the importance of meaningful connectivity? That we are saying that meaningful connectivity is crucial for women to learn. There's a lot of learning to be done so that during the COVID-19, to earn that there's so many livelihoods that people can make out of this digital space, they need also to access and government services. In most governments, and I can give the example of Kenya, without connectivity, without understanding the e-citizen that is a government portal, then you are cut off from most of the government services. And I know it is common in most of our countries, in most of our economies. And therefore, when you're talking about meaningful connectivity, we have divided it into 3 areas. Affordable access. How much are we spending from our money, our earning at the end of the month, our disposable income? At the end of the month, how much do you have, or how much are you spending on internet or related digital services? That the standard should be not more than 2%. But if you go through studies across the globe, people are spending as much as 30% of their disposable income. What is the implication of that? That they're missing on other aspects. That you'll find some people that have spent money to access digital space, to be in this particular probably webinar, to be able to ensure that the kids are able to participate in school programs at the expense of other basic needs. And that is what we are saying it should not be happening. That this should be like a basic need, a basic service that you are able to access your internet, your digital space at minimum expenditure. Then we're also talking about this meaningful connectivity. What is it? It's not just about having a computer and going through the same website 1 hour, 2 hours, trying to access the same thing because the speed is not probably there. You are not having the right device. You don't have unlimited access. So all these challenges. And again, in terms of usage, are you using it on a daily basis? So those are the combination we want to classify as meaningful connectivity. And assuming you have those, you have the supportive social environment. And with this, we are talking about education and skills that for you to be able to understand what is in this digital space, it is a complex space that you need to go there and you have the right skills to discern the information you need to improve on the socio-economic livelihoods. Because that's basically why we have this digital space, is for us to uplift our livelihoods. And again, we are talking of the relevant content. Once you are in that space, you have the relevant content. And this relevant content must be contextualized to your needs. That if it is a health worker, to be able to access telemedicine information, e-health information, to be able to support the patients. If it is a teacher, then you must have the relevant content that is contextualized to the need of your community. You don't really need to access the internet, and the information you have is probably in a different language. It's probably targeting completely different community that does not address your socio-economic or your environment. Then one, you have these two. We are also talking of respect for human rights. That once you're in that digital space, you must feel safe. And by safety, we mean that you don't fear that someone is stalking you, you don't fear that someone will be sending you or your children or your young kids, your elderly parents, inappropriate content. Nobody really wants to get the content they didn't solicit for. So we are talking of a space where everybody is enabled. There's no, if you get harm in that space, then there is a jurisdiction that can address that challenge. But the countries, the borders, they are able to address the challenges that comes with it. And we know this is a challenge, it has been a challenge, and that's something that needs to be addressed. That people must feel safe, whether you're in a community in Nigeria, whether you're somewhere in Mozambique, or somewhere in Kenya, to be safe and assured that you are protected regardless. So combining those three things, that's what we are calling meaningful connectivity. have affordable access, you are meaningfully connected, and you have a supportive social environment. Let's go to the next slide. So in our study, we realized that internet access expansion has also highlighted existing social disparities in access in digital resources, exposing the stark realities of digital inequalities. That we find gender, geography, and education, they plays a big role in access. That people who are in rural areas, people in rural areas are 3 times likely not to have internet access as opposed to those who are in urban areas. Again, we are saying people who are less educated, they have the same challenge. And probably just to tell you, we classified internet access, internet usage as marginally connected, meaningfully connected, and unconnected. Marginally connected are those people who have been able to get the 4, you remember the 4 items you said you are using daily, you have the right device, you have unlimited connectivity, and you have 4G. So if you have all those 4, you are marginally connected. Meaningful connected, you have 3 of that. And unconnected is when you have 2 or 1 of that. So basically, that is what we have here, that different people have different levels of connectivity. And education played a role as well. That you'll find those people who have on a primary education, their level of connectivity is different from those who have tertiary education. And again, we are saying the digital space is for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you have the opportunity to progress in your education. The digital skills needed, they are completely different. If we take a case of M-Pesa in Kenya, everybody can use M-Pesa, whether you are educated or not. And that is what we are saying about digital space. It should not come and start replicating or expanding the exclusions that have been there before. So everybody should be able to have this access. Let's continue. So what are these systemic barriers to digital inclusion? And again, for the 6 countries we surveyed, and if you look at those barriers we see, you'll find different countries had different barriers. Some very prominent in one country and not in the other country. And I'll give an example that lack of devices was common in all the countries. And you will find the average one that shows all the countries' responses. That means lack of devices is a problem, is a challenge we have all across. But then when you look, some challenges are more prominent in some countries and in other countries. And I'm glad we have the case of Mozambique and Nigeria that we try now to contextualize these issues. That yes, we have common barriers to internet access, to digital space, women being excluded in the digital space, but different countries, different communities, different regions, they have different challenges in terms of magnitude, but generally the same challenges cut across all the countries. And with that, I'll pass over to my colleague, Ingrid, to continue with the discussions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nyambura. Hi, everyone. My name is Ingrid, and I'll be taking us through some of the possible solutions and strategies that we uncovered throughout the research. As Nyambura mentioned, we carried out a methodology called policy ethnography, which was really around speaking with policymakers and those who are implementing strategies and solutions to close the gender digital divide, to find out really what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and what is really standing in the way of practices and solutions that we know are impactful and proven to close this divide. So what we found is that there are a range of strategies that policymakers can adopt, and there's surely no single blanket solution and no quick fix solution. And really the frontier of digital inclusion policy is about people-centered solutions. And this requires conscious efforts by policymakers and implementers that put community needs and community leadership front and center. And in order to do this, policymakers should engage with communities and stakeholders to design and implement the appropriate strategy in each specific context. What we found in our review of different policies and strategies and promising practices is that moving beyond infrastructure, closing the gender digital divide relies not only on technological solutions and infrastructure, but also on fostering a supportive social environment and providing affordable access for all. And this really means moving away from siloed interventions that focus either only on access or only on skills, for example, and moving towards a more holistic and comprehensive gender transformative approach that looks at these areas in an integrated way, as well as safety and security, as well as relevant content and services and tools, that looks at all of these areas, also addressing social and cultural norms that are a major impediment for many women and girls in accessing and using the internet and digital technologies. So we propose in our research 4 overarching tiers of achievable solutions, which you can see here on this slide. I'll take us through them very quickly and then go through some examples across the regions that we found of each of these kind of tiers of solutions. So we define deep investments as strategies that have substantial resourcing in a very specific policy area or a community. For example, universal access and service funds. We also identify grand visions, which combine long-term efforts with dedicated funding to really revolutionize the status quo. And here an example would be national broadband plans or strategies that have specific gender focus. Easy wins would be specific changes that create tangible value in a time-bound way. So for example, collecting gender data and doing gender analysis in the ICT sector. And lastly, scalable systems. These are based on systemic changes, looking at changing norms, models, and ways of working. So for example, through adopting multi-stakeholder approaches and community-owned solutions. Next slide, please. So just to go through some examples of these demonstrations of good or promising practices. So one example is community networks, such as the Zenzaleni Community Network in South Africa, which has significantly benefited local communities' connectivity and livelihoods, and particularly for women as well. And these networks leverage innovative solutions like utilizing unused TV white space and optimizing spectrum allocation to close the gap in the provision of infrastructure and connectivity in rural and underserved areas, while engaging the community directly in the ownership and management and decision-making of community infrastructure. Moving along to the example from the Dominican Republic, the social digital basket. So in the Dominican Republic, we found the case of where the ICT regulator provided a subsidy of smart devices and data to women-headed households. And this was based on national data that showed that both impoverished households and unconnected households were more likely to be women-headed households. And so this really shows the importance of investing in women, not only for digital inclusion, but as a broader strategy to address broader economic inequalities and digital inequalities. Moving along to Ghana, we found a really good example from the Ghana Investment Fund for Electronic Communications and their very successful digital skills programs that were very successful, in particular because of the direct involvement of community leadership and local artisanal associations, local livelihood associations, and NGOs to carry out sensitization campaigns in communities that were very intentional of reaching women through having relevant educational curricula on digital skills that reflects women's realities and everyday lived experiences in local languages, and even by providing childcare in digital skills facilities and programs. Moving along to another example, looking at gender in national and regional broadband plans and strategies. In Bangladesh, for example, the new National Broadband Plan of 2023 includes measurable gender targets, and this is important to create a framework for regular review and monitoring of progress towards closing the digital gender divide. At the regional level, we found the good practice of the African Union's digital transformation strategy, as well as the strategy for gender equality, which really illustrate how digital can be embedded in gender policy and how gender can be embedded in digital policies for an integrated framework. So these examples of promising practices from across the regions that we document in our report, and there's many more, we encourage you to dive into the report to read more from Africa as well as other regions of good examples that really offer policymakers and the digital development community at large concrete guidance towards designing and implementing impactful actions and solutions. So I will close just by really encouraging everyone to use this Catalyst study to drive forward your initiatives and commitment to meaningful connectivity. And we welcome questions and further conversations, and looking forward to the next presentations from our lead researchers in Mozambique and Nigeria. Thanks.
Great. At this point, thank you so much, both Nyambura and Ingrid, for giving us that overview of the study and how we came to this. If you will recall, preceding this Connected to Resilience study, we did a study in 2021 looking at what is the economic cost of excluding women from the digital economy. And looking at low income and low middle income countries, the loss in the economy was at over about $1 trillion lost in the economies of these countries by not including women. And so I think that really helps us look at why it's important for us to ensure that there is inclusive development within digital plans and digital development visions and goals, to make sure that our countries can really truly benefit from providing access to everyone, especially women who have disparately been left behind, but ensuring that this access, in doing so, that women don't get excluded from the digital economy, as we are seeing the agency to fast track the digitization of society, including of economies as well. So the next two speakers I'm going to invite are going to just really paint a picture for us in terms of how do these disparities, barriers, opportunities manifest themselves at a local level in terms of, looking at specifically Mozambique as well as Nigeria. So I'm going to first invite Fei Manheche from Robobo Inc. in Mozambique to please lead us through the Mozambique case study.
Great. Thank you, Onica, and thank you, GDIP, for having supported us throughout this research study. It has been a pleasure, and we also learned a lot through it. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so basically, when we started the research, we were definitely looking at how to understand the impact of digital danger gaps on women's participation in the digital economy. And when we were selecting our participants, this was in a way doing the personification of who the ideal candidates or respondents would be. And that's where we did select market vendors, some women that were very prominent in the digital space, namely a startup named Upload in Mozambique. We're also looking at students. We looked at individual women or women that worked in the financial sector at some level, as well as other women, focus groups of women that work in the market, for instance. So the insights were drawn from these interviews, and we then were drawn to interview the telecoms regulator to see what they were also doing in the space of reducing the gender gaps and related to the study. And really our findings and what also surprised us was understanding how we need multifaceted solutions to address the digital gender gaps, including improving access to technology and digital education that are breaking down, also breaking down social barriers to support women to have more inclusive access to meaningful data connectivity. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking at how digital gender gaps affected women's participation overall in the market, when we interviewed market vendors, we immediately understood that one of the major difficulties they had or challenges was with regards to access to a device that has access to the internet. So most of them did use the basic, let's say, dummy phones, because either they have once used a smartphone, however, it broke down and they weren't able to afford its repair, or having a new phone to replace it. So access to the device was a constraint. The second was also with regards to how the solution was used. So most of them did mention using solutions such as WhatsApp or some other social media platform when connected, but it wasn't so much for their day-to-day work in the marketplace, although they did highlight the use of mobile money, such as M-Pesa, so that they could basically receive payments from their clients. And during the pandemic, they did say that they received orders, or people did call them to request some of the items they wanted picked up, and later the people would come to pick up the orders that they had made. With the university students, we did notice that they were a little bit opposite of the market vendor persona. I say that in the sense of they were younger, they were very digitally aware. They use technology and the internet very well, both for studying as well for a small degree of entrepreneurship. They did have access to more useful devices, such as, let's say, your iPhone and other smartphones that were useful for their work. However, they did highlight that the quality of internet was not the best, and especially because these university students were not located in a city setting, so they were somewhat rural area located, and the location was in a rural setting, and it did mean that they had spotty connectivity at certain points. So their engagement during the pandemic for women entrepreneur, and I speak namely about Upload Claire, which is one of our respondents. She did highlight that during the pandemic, she did notice an increase in the number of women that were participating or also accessing the platform to conduct their business. And this does also highlight the need and the potential for adaptation for adequate support. If we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so empowering the effects of meaningful connectivity explores how enhanced economic opportunities through social networks and digital platforms are enabled when there is meaningful connectivity for women. If we look at university students as an example, we see that they communicate both with their lecturers and with their peers for studying using the social networks, and as well as digital resources for learning. We interviewed some women in the financial sector, namely a spokesperson from FSD Mozambique, who did highlight that the access to meaningful connectivity did improve the financial autonomy and personal expression, as well as provided support networks for women. And that was something that has been or still continues to be limited, especially when you go into rural settings, where you do see that women do not have as much access to even have a feature phone, as an example. That's because of social norms or other barriers that do not enable them to have access to such devices and connectivity. The entrepreneurs and influencers were noted as being, let's say, the driving force for youth and university students to also be connected and be in social platforms, to be to understand what was going on, as well as to feel a part of the rest of their peers. The entrepreneur, Claire, namely, noted that digital solutions was one of the success factors for her business, because she was able to now have women throughout the country access their platform, which is an online application, and they were able to conduct their business through that means. If you go to the next slide, please. Looking at the peer networks and digital empowerment, which is a very highlighted point from the financial sector actors, it was mentioned that peer-to-peer networks are crucial for supporting women's digital empowerment. And this is because women learn through their peers, especially accessing the devices. If they hear that a friend uses a given platform for one of their activities, then they are also invited to try it and also install or an application or access certain resources online. Whilst without such networks, it's a little more challenging. For instance, the market vendors did mention that they either learned from a young person in the house who would show them how to use their devices, and that there were no support networks available as such for their work. The networking to provide access to knowledge, skills, and resources, as well as supporting, leading to greater financial inclusion and economic independence, is well highlighted and noted by the respondents, such as women learning digital skills from family and community members, with initiatives that, for instance, are organized and supported by FST Mozambique. If we go to the next slide, please. Great. So as I had mentioned before, some of the key challenges and systematic barriers to connectivity are definitely financial constraints, because, as I mentioned, device costs are quite high in Mozambique, considering the person's capital available, especially in the lower income bracket. There's also a lack of documentation, and also cultural norms that do possess a barrier. So when I mention lack of documentation, means that there are certain women that are not well registered within the having, as I'd say, a national ID, and that is a barrier for them to have access to a internet connectivity, or even to have a mobile SIM card, because that is one of the prerequisites for someone to have access to the internet or a SIM card. And so the cultural norms start from the household, where they are families and let's say husbands or partners that do not enable their spouses to have access to a smartphone, or there is some control over it, or some stigma in how women are supposed to have access to these devices. For instance, another a great barrier is having to decide whether I'd need to get access to the internet or a digital tool over providing for basic needs. And this ultimately is what we all have to decide on, whether a smartphone or access to connectivity is a luxury or it's a necessity. In most cases, it's the latter. Sorry, it's the former. So leaders do emphasize that financial literacy and education are required to overcome these barriers. And the financial educator did outline that the cultural barriers, which I had mentioned again, having access to a SIM card and other services, is still a challenge for most women. For the next slide, please. So the drivers and barriers to access mobile money and its adoption do include the drivers, which are the convenience and accessibility of mobile wallets. Most people do use mobile wallets because of its simplicity. As long as you have a phone number, you are able to transact. But the major barriers are, as mentioned again, it seems repetitive, but it's the reality, which is the lack of documentation, or some businesses are unable to access this form of transaction, maybe because of the fees involved or lack of agents that are around, or even challenges in cashing out. So the barriers disproportionately affect women because it is seen in our society that most men do have access to these documents and the requirements to have access to these solutions. However, for women, in some cases, it's still a challenge. Over to the next slide, please. So we did speak to the regulator, the National Institute that regulates the telecommunication, and they, although at the moment they don't have specific programs targeted at women or even any statistics on programs that are implemented that affect or to benefit women. They did highlight and mention that they had implemented several programs to achieve inclusive connectivity, and these include digital libraries, internet in schools, assistive technologies, and public internet hotspots. So the ongoing projects do include free spectrum access to operators and initiatives like TV stands in local communities. And despite these progresses, we do currently see that it doesn't disaggregate whether it's specifically for women or any other gender-based disaggregation for the results of these programs. So in overall, we do see that access to device, which the colleagues from GDIP had already highlighted as also a few of the major challenges, does play a big role in providing women access to adequate connectivity. And the cost of data, without a doubt, is a major driving force. And I think looking through a few months ago in Mozambique, we have had even some strikes because the government did try to make a change in the cost of access to data, and there were many women very active in promoting the negative impacts that these would have in enabling people have access to both education as well as other resources. And thankfully, it got cancelled, and the government did go back on their plans. But these are factors that have to be considered when we do want truly meaningful digital connectivity. And that is all for now, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fei. Without taking too much time, I'm going to invite Tope, who will come and give us the case for Nigeria. Over to you, Tope.
Thanks a lot, Onica. Morning. Okay, so it's not, it's may not be morning where you are, not like it's morning where I am. Don't know why I said morning, but hello, everyone. It's It's my pleasure to join this webinar and to discuss the case study from Nigeria. Next slide, please. So in Nigeria, currently, what we saw during the research and what is still happening is that the major issue is with access and affordability, as people have already said earlier. Currently, the poverty, the projection for poverty rate in Nigeria is at over 40% for this year. So that's really concerning when you think of what that means, for affordability, whether it's affordability of data or affordability of devices. There's research to suggest that most women in rural areas, in peri-urban areas, do not have access to smartphones. But what we found in our research, and I should also say that the research, during the research, we spoke to women from urban areas, from rural areas, from peri-urban areas, which remain underserved communities around the urban areas. We spoke to women of all ages from between 18 and about a little over 60 years. Some of them were students, some of them were in the informal sector, some of them, we had key informal interviews also with business leaders, entrepreneurs, people in government, but mostly within focus groups that we had with groups of women across, like I'd mentioned, urban, peri-urban, or rural areas. We were finding that access to data and device was, a common complaint in terms of like access to what was restricting access to the internet. The women recognized the importance of being on the internet, but affordability was a big issue for women across these areas and across professions and across ages. So in terms of thinking about what is defined as meaningful connectivity, we were seeing that even when women had access to device, sometimes it wasn't appropriate, but they had some form of smart device that they were using. 4G like speed is not common. Most of these women do not have unlimited access to broadband connections at home or in the office. Most of the connection is via cellular. And I'm talking about, in this case, younger women living in urban areas, students, professionals. They would have a device, but not necessarily an appropriate device. They will not be able to access unlimited broadband at home or at work. It wasn't really common. Daily use was common for those who had smartphones. Many people were already on social media, but the restricted access to data meant that it was difficult to then use the phone for things like educational opportunities or improving entrepreneurial or job opportunities. So we saw across board that lack of equitable access. We saw many women also, especially in the rural or peri-urban areas, again, due to affordability issues, they share devices within households with their brothers, with their uncles. And then on top of that layer is just like infrastructural challenges, so unstable electricity, and again, I already mentioned things like limited internet speed. Next slide, please. So we also saw that along with that limited access to economic resources, women had greater care burden. So when it comes to time to even improve their digital literacy skills, to find out how the internet could benefit them in other ways, it was really difficult. Survival is the main issue for many of these women, just given the realities of the economic downturn during the pandemic and then what followed after. Inflation rates are at an all-time high in the country. Purchasing power has never been so low. Nominal earnings have not kept up with that inflation rate. And so people are very, very survival focused and they are forced to prioritize. And when women who mostly have like the care burden for children and have to earn daily income in order to feed, when they have to choose, sometimes data and device may not be the priority. So there's that there's that additional layer as well. And then we also found that there was generally a lack of community support, whether that's in like community centers, digital hubs, places where women can go to access free Wi-Fi, to access support, with skills or with jobs or things like that. There was generally a lack of those kind of that kind of support for women and girls across demographic, across urban and rural areas. There did exist some interventions around digital skills in urban areas, most of which would be focused on youth, not on women. And then sometimes when it was intended to focus on women, it will still not be gender responsive enough in the way that those trainings were set up. So women really didn't also have places to go for support or where to access the internet publicly. Next slide, please. Yeah, so digital literacy levels were something that really stood out to us. We found a skill gap. Of course, the women in rural areas that already lacked access to basic education, did not have smartphones at all, maybe used feature phones. That was a level of like skill gap that we found. But even within urban areas, and women who were in formal education systems, we still found that there was that skill gap when it comes to digital literacy or digital demand-driven, what I would call demand-driven digital skills more broadly. When we'll speak to business leaders and entrepreneurs, much of their technical needs are met by men. They express that, not a lot of women are coming through the talent pipeline with the required skills. There's that skill gap that is there. I think I already mentioned that, we found digital literacy programs that were mostly civil society led, interestingly, or sometimes private sector led. We didn't find a lot of interventions by government in that area. There is a digital literacy curriculum of sorts that we know that is being adapted into the national education curriculum, but which is not trickling down. It's really not happening yet in public schools especially. So we would find interventions that are civil society or private sector or CSR led. But again, they mostly target young people. They target people in urban areas, people who are already in the formal education systems. And even then, they would hardly provide demand-driven skills. So not much support that is targeted for women. I also mentioned that the same barriers that women face when it comes to like accessing other opportunities, they are facing those same barriers when it comes to accessing digital skills. Care burden and early marriage is something that's happening, again, across rural and peri-urban areas in Nigeria, and limiting women from formal education and also from digital skills and, exploring the opportunities that come with it. The next slide. We also have like sociocultural norms, beliefs, religious beliefs also, where some men, control their women's use of the internet, just generally restricting women's access to public spaces. Again, a continuum of what happens offline. So as a result of all of these barriers, of course, inevitably, women's economic opportunities are hampered. They are unable to really use digital tools to improve their business opportunities. In urban areas, we did find that especially the younger women are exploring digital tools to improve entrepreneurial or business opportunities. But we also did find that during the pandemic, they had really limited access to data. Again, affordability issues was one of it. So given how they were able to use digital tools to improve business was limited, it was more of understanding that the potential is there and doing what they could with the little that they had. But, they really couldn't do, they expressed the women expressed that restrictions in in access to data affected how much they were able to do in terms of using digital tools to improve business opportunities. Again, when it came to education during pandemic, there was really a gap there. Many people could not continue to school. Those who were students could not continue to school. Educational gaps were also exacerbated at this time. And of course, this further entrenched existing socioeconomic opportunities, and civic participation and things like access to information was also restricted at this time. Next slide, please. So during the pandemic, what we did find was there was a lot of movement towards mobile money. Before then, the uptake was really, really slow. But during the pandemic, when people could not access traditional banks, there was a lot of like movement towards mobile money. But when people also still do not have even basic phones, that becomes a problem. So even though we find that the use of mobile money is increasing, again, in rural areas where people do not have access to phones, is still restricted. We were seeing that people were, the issue of trust and safety online was also a big issue. Negative experiences around online purchases, scam, product misrepresentation, and also fears around online harassment and safety and privacy. This was really restricting how women and girls were using digital tools as well for business opportunities. Next slide, please. Okay, so we found that there were strategies that were being developed by the communities themselves outside of like government interventions to cope with that exclusion that was happening. We found that women often, similar to what was happening in Mozambique, women were leveraging peer support and knowledge, some form of informal knowledge sharing to access digital resources. We found that among women traders, in the informal sector, they have a way of self-educating, of educating themselves, of sharing knowledge amongst themselves. And mostly it was, what we found them using was social media to one degree or other to promote business. We found again that most civil society, there were civil society organizations that moved in to fill the gap in terms of digital literacy skills. But we did not find that those civil society organizations were resourced enough to reach many people. In talking also with the government official that we spoke to, we noted that there was uncertainty within government. At this time, we were transitioning in Nigeria from one government to another. Elections were just concluded, the cabinet was changing. And when things like that happen in Nigeria, you find entire policy directions ditched and then new ones surface. And we were being told that in the new policy direction for the digital economy, there was no specific mention of gender. There was a roadmap, a blueprint that had just been launched at this time for the digital economy in the country that had some areas of focus, including like things like innovation and trade and infrastructure, but no mention of gender. No gender or inclusion targets were mentioned in that policy plan. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the things that the direction that was emerging in Nigeria is very consistent with what's happening, elsewhere in the world. In terms of investments in infrastructure, affordable access has to be priority. There has to be one way or other that women are able to afford smartphones and internet services. Digital literacy programs have to be more gender sensitive. They have to be demand driven, and they have to take into consideration the multiple intersectional barriers that women and girls face. Next slide, please. Rights and privacy also, it's not enough to have access to the internet. It's also very important for women and girls to feel like this is a welcome an empowering space. And, that's something that we found throughout the research as well, that was restricting both access and use. There has to be awareness campaigns to address those sociocultural barriers and gender stereotypes. Nigeria does not currently collect national ICT data, much less sex disaggregated. And I think that, again, in line with the overall policy direction in the research, this is so important. It's so important to understand the impact of internet access on women's economic and social and educational outcomes. And finally, the importance of partnerships and collaborations cannot be overemphasized in addressing all these challenges. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tope, for that overview on Nigeria. And again, I think we will all agree that many of these themes are themes that we have been fully aware of, but it's always great to kind of take a deeper dive into looking at exactly, what is the disparate impact specifically on women. We cannot afford to assume a build it and they will come posture towards digital development, assuming that, because it's digital, then women will also be there. Because we know that those disparities against women that happen offline also just simply get replicated in our online world as well. So we do have a question that is in the chat at the moment. I'm going to just ask Carmen to please stop sharing so we can see everyone on here. And we should start with the first question that we have already from Josephine. And I don't know, Josephine, if you're still here, if you want to come on camera and ask the question yourself, or we can just answer it from what you've expressed here. Josephine? Going once. Okay, let me read the question actually. So her question is that, how do we break the silos? And she's asking for examples that we may have come across where government, policymakers or governments basically work with, in working on digital development, also work with other stakeholders outside of just within government. So just kind of an example of that collaboration, whether it's through public and private or public civil society collaboration towards, addressing some of these issues and recognizing that it's going to take a whole society type approach, I guess, and not just one particular sector working on these issues. Ingrid, do you have some insights on this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for your question, Josephine. Thanks, Onica. So just to come in on this, we've found and very much advocate for a multi-stakeholder approach as the cornerstone of transformative gender responsive policies. In our review, we did find that those that are most impactful have a range of stakeholders with community consultation and women themselves front and center of the initiative. And a lot of the success of that started with having gender data and gender analysis for stakeholders including digital development partners, to make the case. In many cases as well, or a few cases like in the Philippines and in Mozambique, we found that once the government had initiated systematically collecting gender and ICT data through national statistics, then there was an evidence base to really make that case and invite also other stakeholders in to design responses based on that concrete evidence of the gap and the experiences of women. So that's, really front and center and part of what this study also contributes to, and looking qualitatively, not just at the statistics, but at the contextual and narrative experiences of women that address social cultural norms as well, and the broader kind of experiences, lived experiences of women.
Awesome. And I think, if we look at just a lot of the work that has happened in this sector, and the push for multi-stakeholderism, stakeholder approach towards addressing some of these issues, it really gets to the crux of what the question from Josephine is about. Because I think one of the things that we've seen is that approaches that include collaboration, where there's proper consultation with civil society and engagement, tend to last a lot longer, as opposed to programs that are just only driven as a government agenda. And sometimes, unfortunately, and I think I will give us the example of public Wi-Fi in the city of Tshwane. I think, many of us spoke a lot about how the city of Tshwane in South Africa was providing public Wi-Fi up to 500 megabits per day per person who logs in throughout the city. And while that was absolutely amazing, it was very short-lived, because as soon as we had elections and a different government came into power, it was no longer, political plan for the next government that took over that city to continue to provide the Tshwane Wi-Fi, and so that became the first thing to go. So you can only imagine if civil society had been a very big part of this plan, and that there would have at least had been some negotiations around how do you protect this as a core service delivery to the community, as opposed to it being left up to political whim and interests in that way. So we need more and more examples of such, where there's better collaboration instead of government going at it alone or civil society going at it alone. That there's support, there's mutual support on both ends, as well as private sector, by the way. In fact, we know that in order for us to close the infrastructure gap that exists in the continent, where we still have less than 50% of the people here connected, we need quite a lot of money, over $400 billion, I think, according to the last report from the World Bank. And even if private sector could provide half of that, government would still have to make sure that it contributes towards that. And, so public-private partnerships that include civil society are really, really important in making sure that we reach these universal coverage goals, as well as close some of these other gaps along the way. I don't see any questions. I don't see a hand up, but if somebody sees a hand up, please shout out. And, so any questions at this moment, any examples of what's working in your community interest? We will be doing more of this workshop, focusing more on a detailed workshop plan to really look at people who may be interested in conducting this kind of study in their countries. So please do contact us. I'm going to share an email in the chat here, an email address in the chat for GDIP. So please do reach out to us if you are interested in doing a little bit more or sharing a case study. I'm sure Ingrid is always willing to look at new case studies. We are really eager to see how these challenges and opportunities present themselves in your community, and what solutions are actually seem to be working at closing this gender digital divide. Because I think we can all agree that an economy that is not inclusive of women is not one that's destined for much success. Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm missing anyone, but if there's no questions, we have recorded this session and we will be sharing the recording later. I see a long post from Peace. Peace, would you like to speak?
Oh, yes, thank you. Let me turn on my video and raise my hand. Hi, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Onica. It's really nice and inspirational to hear from you. This is a topic that really, really, hits me close to my heart, because as Zimba women, we're working at digital literacy for the, for the unconnected, or for the, I liked how you talked about meaningful connectivity, because it's not just about having a mobile phone, being connected, but actually having equitable access that you can, quantify and also create impact for your communities. One thing that stood out for me, and I already mentioned it in my post, when Fei talked about household control of the devices in the communities, especially in the rural areas, the phones or any other device that connects to the internet is controlled by the men or even owned by the men. And one thing we realized when working with the communities is that when we have trainings that, let's say you announce and say we have a training specifically for women, the men kind of feel alienated and they will not make it possible for the women to attend these trainings. So in having these calls out, it's important for us to work with rural communities, religious leaders, even civil society leaders, because the men in positions of power are able to influence other men to let the women come for the training. So it's important in our outreaches and even in our research to emphasize that the UN Women has that He for She campaign, and it has been very helpful for us in doing our work, because when we include men, when we actually invite men into our training spaces, we have more numbers of women, because these men will carry along their sisters, their wives, their daughters. So that's very something I just wanted to highlight, and yeah, something that we are seeing work successfully for us in our outreaches. And thank you so much for this.
Awesome. Thank you, Peace. We definitely would love to hear more about the work that you are doing at Zimba Women as well. So there is a question here from Matthew Mims about Starlink and our thoughts on things like Starlink as a way to widen the access. And I think, our position has been fairly consistent around this, that we have to be open to different digital technology options in order to connect everyone. Likewise, we have to be open to a different financial model for connecting everyone. And so it's really important, I think, as a continent and as countries, while we are working on these digital development plans, to really fight for connecting everyone in a manner that is agnostic to what technology specifically are connecting people to, as long as it is safe, it is good, and it reaches people. But also equally, we have to be committed to a different financial model. One of the case studies that cases that Ingrid highlighted was, I think, Dominican Republic, where they've got a subsidy, a digital subsidy for households that are not able to afford. I think, in this continent, we have so many households that live on less than $2 per day. Even at the 1 for 2 affordability rate, which is still quite inadequate, we know that those communities would not be able to, still not be able to afford access. And so this notion that digital subsidies create dependency, I think sociologically they might have some merit in certain places, but I think there needs to be a recognition that even for a person who absolutely cannot afford any kind of data, they should be able to tap into public access as a way to subsidize their data. In fact, we know a lot of people who are gainfully employed who subsidize their data through free Wi-Fi whenever they can be able to access it. So absolutely, I think Starlink is also, one of the opportunities that we have to include in the mix, especially given the topography of the continent as well. I hope that covers your response. We certainly would love to get more case studies of people who are using that. I know Ghana has an example with the Africa, the backpack program, where they are connecting communities through this Africa internet program that Wisdom is part of. But we definitely hope that more and more we will be able to have these different kinds of options and examples as well. I'm going to invite just briefly, I believe one person had asked to speak, Harira Wakili. Please unmute.
Thank you very much, Onica. I have a question with regards to, for Tope, with regards to Nigerian context. So I'm looking at the core notes where we mostly see issue of digital divide and how women in the North are suffering from digital marginalization. What are the interventions have you made so far in the North to ensure women are digitally included in this aspect? Because we have been working for a quite period of time to ensure digital inclusion, mostly in the grassroots level, but at the same time, we believe that it's not a work of it's a work for all civil society organizations and like-minded individuals. So in this context, what are the things, what are the interventions so far we are doing so we can, is there any open for collaboration that we can collaborate to do some of the work, most especially in the North where we are facing quite a number of challenges with regards to that. Looking at it, it's not only the women in the rural community, but also women living in the urban, working in the ecosystem are still facing the same challenges, even though it's not as the same as those in the rural parts due to educational gap and other socio-political gaps. So what are the things that you do and so that we can see where we can work together to ensure to address the issue mostly in the North? Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Harira Wakili. I work with Center for Information and Technology, CTAD, and I'm also part of the LockNet project as the Regional Gender Coordinator for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome,
Harira.
great. I'm gonna give Tope an opportunity to respond to that. Oh, there you are. Awesome. Go ahead, Tope.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Harira. It's very nice to meet you. Meet you, anyways. So I think that one of the things that we can do is what we're already doing, which is research to understand the extent of the issue and also being able to engage policy with this data. You know, one of the things that I mentioned is that we don't even have nationally collected ICT data, much less sex disaggregated data. Also working with GDIP, I won't say a few years back, maybe many years back, not that many. I think we produced the first country report on the state of women's connectivity in Nigeria. And I think that those are the kind of things that we should be looking at doing again. I mentioned also that currently with administration change, you understand how things are, the focus is different. In the last administration, in the last couple of administrations, there's been more room to engage. There's been policy documents that were that had at least some type of gender and inclusion target, but it looks like the focus is very different. This time around is more on revenue generation, and there's not a lot of attention being given to the gap that exists. And I think that there's, you know, work is cut out for us in those areas. So I think we can focus on research, we can focus on data, we can focus on engaging policy. And I know of CTAD very well, and I know that, you know, this is some of the work that you do, but I also think that additionally is empowering the civil society organizations that are working in the region, working with women on other issues, working with women on safeguarding, on other types of rights, on other types of socioeconomic or political empowerment issues, to understand that the digital empowerment is foundational to all of these things that they're working on, to understand the importance of women's connectivity to their socioeconomic empowerment. You know, I think that if we can have those conversations with civil society organizations that are traditionally not in the digital space, but have the infrastructure to reach women, there are opportunities, you know, to be able to not just invite them into these networks that advocate for women's digital inclusion, but also to be able to include some type of inclusion work as part of what they do currently. So those are my ideas for how we can engage for women in Northern Nigeria.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Tope. We have about 5 minutes before closing. Are there any other questions or hands up? If not, I have shared some links on on the chat here that you can certainly take a look at. This last one is a link to our partnerships page. If you think that your organization would be interested in becoming a GDIP partner, we encourage you to please reach out to our partnerships team and join this growing network of civil society, private sector, and government entities that are committed in advancing meaningful connectivity in the global majority world. We thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this webinar, and we hope that you will continue to walk this journey of highlighting connected resilience of women and ensuring that we don't continue to leave them behind in digital development plans as well as in the digital economy. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.